So I would say the big difference is when I was the one thing that I previously talked about of trying to find the comparable products and the cost factors. That's where things are going to kind of differ, because with non-specialty products, normally you do have a reference product to go for. So for example, if a new diabetes drug comes out, there are numerous diabetes drugs in numerous different classes. So if a new insulin were to come out, or a new SLGT2 or any type of drug like that, we can have a pretty good indication on what that cost is going to be. We also have a pretty good idea on what kind of patients are on it, because we already have a lot of utilization among those drugs. When you start talking about specialty drugs, you're now talking about a much narrower market. And so now you've got a much smaller patient population and a much higher cost on the drug. And so it becomes harder to kind of exactly nail down exactly what that impact is going to be. So I would say with specialty drugs, we're doing a lot more study on the epidemiology, how prevalent is this condition, trying to nail down exactly how many patients are probably could be taking this drug. And obviously we're factoring in a much higher cost impact on the specialty drugs, because they tend to have a higher cost due to the lower prevalence and higher manufacturing costs to develop and everything. So that's the big thing. Where they're kind of similar, though, is it's still kind of the same idea. You're trying to figure out how many patients are going to take the drug, and then what the cost of the drug is and the uptake. So that's similar. It's just where you get that information from, whether it's more your diagnosis code information or news articles, epidemiology, or historical utilization, which you can do more easily on the traditional side of things because you have more similar products to compare to. Yes, it is. Because of, like I said, when we talk about like traditional, and diabetes is just one example I always come up with and everything, if we have a new insulin coming to the market or a new GLP-1, any type of different class, we have a lot of comparator drugs to compare that to. We also have a wider range of prevalence, and the cost of the drug is cheaper, to where if 5 patients go on this drug, it's not really going to change your spend that much. It's not going to move that overall needle. We start talking about specialty drugs, in diabetes drugs, you're talking about something that may cost several thousand a year. Whereas in the specialty side, you're talking about something that could be $100,000 a year, maybe even more than that, even upwards of $1 million a year. So now just one patient taking that can now greatly influence, your overall spend and everything. So that's why I think there's more attention on it, and why it is more random in a way. As a statistician, we would say it's noisy data. It's harder to predict because, with traditional drugs and diabetes, we can trend that out and we can kind of see how that's trended over time. It's very stable. It may be growing, but it's still pretty stable. There's not a lot of random variation within it. Whereas within the specialty space, one patient taking something can greatly impact that overall number. And that can be very difficult for a statistician to try and predict and figure out what's going to happen when you have one patient, since a lot of the things that we do is based on, the law of averages and regression to the mean and those types of things, which you don't get as much in the specialty space. It's mostly the drug benefit, which sometimes that can be billed on the medical side. Sometimes that can be billed on the pharmacy side. And a lot of times we talk about these high cost specialty drugs, they are billed on the medical side of the benefit, but there's still the drug cost. So the things that we tend to not factor in at this point is we tend to look at it in isolation. So we're not necessarily saying, okay, there's this new drug coming out, but in order to get it, you have to have this particular biopsy or this particular diagnosis that may cost $1,000 to go to the doctor and have done. Typically, we're not factoring that in. We're only looking at what is the cost of the drug and how many patients will be on it. So we're not looking at like extra lab visits, extra doctor visits, and things like that, because usually in the grand scheme of things, the drug cost is, when we're talking about specialty drugs, are so much higher. That's where the bulk of the cost comes in, and that's where payers are mostly focused right now. The first thing I would say is the first thing I'll say is the number one thing I see sometimes, especially when I work with other clinicians, is they see a new drug coming out and they see that it's going to really change maybe the dynamic of the class and everything. And because of that, they expect the second the drug releases that instantly every patient that has this is going to start on the drug right away. When typically that's not what we see. Typically, if you have 100 patients that maybe are eligible for the drug in the first year, maybe only 5 to 10 are going to actually start on therapy on that drug. It takes time for a drug to gain traction in the marketplace, for prescribers to feel comfortable with it. And of course, this all depends on the drug. Is it a brand new treatment option, or is this something that maybe, hey, there is another treatment option? So doctors are obviously going to be hesitant to change a winning team, so to speak. But if it's brand new, then, and depending on the condition itself, if we're talking about something that's for oncology, that is, third stage, basically a last chance kind of hope to try and cure it, then that is going to take off a lot faster because the benefits outweigh the risk. So that's the first thing is that understand that these drugs take a while to take off, even the very successful ones. And the other thing is to remember that it is forecasting. A lot of this is uncertain. So anything that is done, it's just an estimate. And a lot of times when we forecast, we try to make sure that we prepare. We try to be more aggressive because we want to make sure that the plan is aware and able to prepare adequately. And the worst thing you can do is tell someone, hey, this drug's not going to be an impact for you. And then next thing you know, it's $1 million of their spend. And they weren't prepared for it. They weren't, didn't set aside that money and are starting to panic about it and everything. So understand it is forecasting. There's going to be a lot of uncertainty, and there's going to be times where it's going to miss because new information is going to change. Sometimes we'll forecast drugs, and the next thing we know, the FDA is sending out a CRL and the drug's not getting approved. And so we have to redo it. Or sometimes we'll say, oh, we think the drug is going to cost this much, and it comes in cheaper than what we actually thought. So that's the second thing, is to understand they are forecasting, they are estimates. Nothing's perfect. So those would be the two things, the uptake rate, and then the fact that it's forecasting and there is uncertainty there.